Hi, it's time for good energy, and I'm Dr. Julie, and welcome to Bodyful 238. We're talking about cold and the senses, and today we're talking about the sense of sight. This is our first day on cold and the senses, and if you've been following through the series, you know that this series is the series this is the time I usually hijack the first sense to talk a little bit more about what we're talking about today. All right, so before we jump in, we're going to talk about the sense of sight, and we're going to talk about, specifically with cold, we're going to talk about Raynaud's syndrome and symptoms that go with that. And because there's phenomenon and there's a syndrome, and we're just going to talk about it. It is cold in the extremities, cold extremities, so that's what we're talking about today. All right, so let's start with the basics. Take a deep breath in. And release. Now, if you're new to our series, the second breath is always going to be a bigger breath. It is going to be one that expands in the belly. You're going to expand in the chest, and you're going to expand in the sinuses. So imagine that breath has to fill up your entire trunk and go into your head. And if you do that, then what's going to happen is your tailbone is going to feel like it goes under, or at least it unhinges a little bit from your lumbar spine. So let's go ahead and take this deep breath in. And release. All right, so we're talking about cold. Cold in your fingers, colds in your toes, cold in your hands and feet, and in order to talk about that, I want you to breathe into any time that you have really, truly gotten very cold hands and feet. Take a deep breath in and release. All right, so cold hands and feet, lack of circulation to the extremities. Sometimes it's referred to as Raynaud's syndrome for those who get severe issues where the whole fingers turn white, and they look like they just are not getting any warmth, any blood flow, to just being minorly chilled very easily. And so when we talk about Raynaud's phenomenon or syndrome, we're talking about this ability to kind of just get really this side effect of getting really cold really fast. And it really doesn't matter about the weather. So the irony, of course, is that today is one of the last brilliant days in Iowa before we start actually getting into the real fall, rather than the faux fall where we already had two snowstorms or two bits of snow. So it is a very nice day out. But it is possible for people who have Raynaud's and who have poor circulation to find even this weather, which is probably in the 60s right now, to cause decrease in blood flow to the hands and feet. So our goal with this series is to look to find energy to increase your circulation equals good energy in minus stressors. And we're going to talk about the sense of sight and the relationship to that. But I want to talk a little bit about more why. Why would we end up with poor circulation to our hands and feet? Why would we end up with hands and feet that get particularly cold at times in our life, at times in the day? And I have suffered from Raynaud's syndrome, phenomena. I have not, they don't turn really white, but phenomena since I was probably about 7 years old. And what's interesting is that I have always had it. Like, I can't get into boots. If I wear boots out at winter, my feet get cold instantly, even if I'm walking around. Gloves, I go out walking even during the middle of winter, so I have to wear really multiple layers of socks and multiple layers of gloves. And it's not until I get good 20-30 minutes that things start to warm up. Until that point, they're absolutely frozen cold. And this happened when I was walking. It happened when I was running. They just stayed cold. Now, what can trigger this? So from a chiropractic perspective, especially cold fingers, cold fingers and hands can be triggered by the fact that the blood flow to the arms has to go through what's called the brachial plexus. And that is this region of lymphatic, nervous system, and blood flow, veins and arteries, and that has to go between the neck and the collarbone and past these muscles and ribs and then down into the arms. And from a very simple chiropractic structural perspective, if any of these things, if the collarbones, if the ribs, if the shoulder, if the neck is not in correct position, because all of those contribute to blood flow or contribute to the flow of energy down into that arm, if any of those are out, you are going to have cold, possibly cold and numbness, possibly cold, numbness, and swelling because of the lymphatic flow to those hands. Now, what about the feet? You might say, is there a chiropractic link to the feet? Yep, it can be through your pelvis. So if your pelvis is off, particularly your pubic bone, because again, your lymphatic system has to go through your lymphatic system, and a number, not all, of your arteries and veins go through the front of your body, through underneath and through your inguinal canal and then out into your legs. You also have some nervous system input that comes from the back as well. And if something is impinging there, if you have a really tight hip flexor, if you have a pubic bone that is out of place, you are going to have tightness in the groin, which is then going to trigger decreased flow of energy to your legs and feet. So any of those structural stressors can have a significant effect on cold or warmth in your extremities. But there's one that we have to talk about because it's related to mental stress, and that is your nervous system's setup to stress. Now, we've talked about the nervous system's response to stress, and we've talked about it in terms, when you hear about it, when the adrenals say, hey, when the tiger attacks, we either fight or flight. We fight it or we run away. Now, the interesting thing about that in relationship to circulation, fighting or running away requires that we have a lot of blood flow to our hands and to our feet. So for those whose mental wiring is, I'm going to punch you out or I'm going to get the heck out of Dodge, they actually are less likely, and of course this is the mental state, less likely to have cold fingers and toes, because their primary response to stress is to get boosted up, for whether it's a fight or whether it's a sprint, so that they are the furthest one ahead, so it's the person in the back that gets eaten. However, there are two other responses to stress that we might have. One of them is a fawn response, which means when you are encountered with stress, when you are the beta female in a pack of wolves, you roll over and you do what's asked of you to make sure that the alpha treats you nicely. That is what fawning is. But the other one is freezing. Freezing, your goal is to stay as still as you possibly can so that the stress goes past. Now, fawning doesn't necessarily require a response, a nervous system response or a blood flow response or a sympathetic nervous system response to increase blood flow to your hands and feet. Neither does freeze. Freeze requires that you stay as still as you possibly can, whether it be still physically, like I know the tiger is coming, if I don't move, it won't hear me. Or if we talk about it psychologically, I don't know how to deal with the flooding in the basement. So instead of doing anything, I am just going to stay put and watch Netflix because I don't know how to do it. That is a freeze response. Now, that's an overly dramatic freeze response, but we can think about lesser situations when you're like, I am so stressed, I am just going to sit here and do nothing. And when you sit and do nothing, You don't have to have energy to get you out of that response. And so because of that, you don't need blood flow. So for a lot of people whose primary response to stress is either fawning or freezing, it's not surprising that their nervous system says, hey, we're not going to actually prioritize your hands and feet. Now, my primary response pattern is freeze. And when I step onto a cliff, or when as a family we go sightseeing and we're sightseeing at someplace very high, I shut down because of my fear of heights. I don't move, I don't talk, I don't do anything. That is my primary response, is to freeze. So it's not surprising that my nervous system has said, hey, we don't need to put blood flow to your hands and feet. Now, I don't have Raynaud's syndrome so that they don't turn bright white. I have had them turn bright white once, but that was due to weather. And it was actually, I had lunch, gone out in cold weather, and I had a response. Now, that triggers the other idea that what happens when you are in fight or flight, which is the active system, what happens is that the body deprioritizes digestion and prioritizes external nourishment, getting it to your extremities. When you are in freeze or fawn, the body prioritizes digestion and takes the blood out of your arms, or legs. So this gets back to that little thing about don't go swimming a half hour after you've eaten. You can. It's just that your body is spending more energy on digesting your food than actually putting energy into your muscles in order to swim. So, with all that said, let's get on to the concept of sight. All right, so sight can be a stressor, because if you are a person whose primary sympathetic nervous system response is freeze or fawn, when you see stress, your body will automatically put the blood flow into your core. And because of that, you will have cold hands and feet. But it can also be good energy in. So if you know that you have seen something particularly scary, you can use colors. You can use colors and other visuals to pull you back to functioning, to move you from sympathetic to parasympathetic, which then, even though parasympathetic is more core oriented, it would calm your nervous system down so that you could allow blood flow to your hands and feet. All right, so I sort of cheated on that one, but that is how sight can influence Raynaud's syndrome or phenomenon, or cold extremities. But the basics, as I wanted you to know, is that this week we're going to be talking about how to increase the temperature, how to heal cold hands and feet, or increase the temperature in your extremities by looking at sensory stressors, and sensory good energy in. All right, I hope you are having a great day. It is going to be colder tomorrow. I will be in my coat, and I will see you back here then. Let's finish it off. Take a deep breath in and release. Take care.